Okay, so Rachel LaRoche, you have to call in, Rachel, so I can learn how to pronounce that name, probably. How would you make that applicable in all the U.S.? And she's asking about applying the critical thinking aspect of education more systematically.
Did you want to take it?
You take it.
I was just going to say, you discussed earlier about how you discussed earlier about how you had that that part of your education included where your first semester you learned a concept and that you built on it from there, kind of, and it was a very stacking oriented thing, right? Uh, in Yeah, so in the U.S., we have I'm in Washington State, and so in Washington State there's a university called Evergreen University. It was kind of basically developed by a bunch of hippies out here in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was mostly just a bunch of people that wanted to get together and wanted to learn things, and it's always had a very alternative model, and that model was it was built on kind of what I don't know if we really got into, but there's a man named Humboldt, and it was brothers, the Humboldt brothers, that were in Germany, and you've probably heard, if you've talked with some German folks about education, about the Bildung, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and there's a longer, more Germanic name for that, but it's a educational system, and I'm sure Nis will go on in a moment to discuss more about how it was developed, but the idea is to develop global citizens, to develop a person as a whole, to give them the skills to critically think and to do those types of things. In Washington, at Evergreen University, you can check it out, they're trying to do that. The way that our university system is set up with funding and those types of things, that there's a lot of archaic structures in place that prevent us from trying new educational models that aren't within the comfort zone of the established experts that we kind of discussed earlier. And so when you do something very different than that, you get a lot of pushback from people that are comfortable or benefit from the way things are, or just the general notion of people not liking change. And so how in America we do that, in my view, is we look towards more of these types of educational facilities. Evergreen's one example. There's other liberal arts colleges that are doing these types of things where, for instance, how a class would work at Evergreen was you would have 2 or 3 professors. One might be of math, one might be of have a language background, and one might be a teacher. And so what you would do is you would integrate those 3 perspectives in the course content in ways that you don't see nowadays. It's kind of like elementary, how you remember you would go through 4 or 5 subjects in a day, but you were in the same classroom the whole time, and generally good teachers would try and build off of what you learned in the morning and connect that social studies concept to that thing you learned in, about science or whatever, using that at the university level with university professor minds and college educated, or the beginnings of college educated students engaging at that level, and I find that much more productive in my experience with it.
Okay, thank you for covering. I had to step out on nature's behalf. So I was told that you mentioned the Humboldt and the universities, and that
Yes.
I would elaborate on the higher education. Let's see here. There's a comment from a BS opinion again. The problem is being able to convince people that the state municipality is able to experiment without needing to involve the private market. That's actually quite good. We should do a show on that. Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
That's actually
There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Very, very good. And I got a comment from one of our behind-the-scenes producers. I love this. He even shares his restroom breaks with the audience.
Capitalism.
No, it's communism. I share everything.
Everything.
Okay, so the universities we have today, they are modeled after what you call the Humboldtian model of higher education. Now, Humboldtian comes from the name Humboldt, which is the last name of an 1800s 1800s thinker and minister from Prussia. Prussia, that is Prussia as in a state in Germany, before Eastern Germany got given to Poland. So his vision for university was, you have a university in which a student applies to come and study at a faculty, but he puts together his own curriculum. And he then, in his meeting with these different professors, are met with scrutiny, with ideas, with he's stripped of his biases, of his assumptions, but at the same time he also incurs new blood, new idea, new ways of thinking into the professor's mind, and that professor then takes that with him to the faculty, and then they are thus affected by the world around them. And this is the base idea of educating all humans on the humanist principles to a degree where everyone gets like the advanced education, and the university becomes a form of safeguard of society, constantly bringing new blood, new debate, new discussion into these things. Now, we have moved incredibly hard away from this system. Now, there are many reasons for this. One of them being that some propaganda and some indoctrination is so hard to get rid of that there are some students that can go through their entire university experience without changing their mind. Also, there are other students that then, because they go into groups, with others, they then adopt their opinions, or at least to some measure, which means that groups starts forming and coalescing, and then you have the idea bacteria that we discussed in the first hour of the show. And also, institutional memory was not something that was researched a lot on, so professors, they live in their own echo chambers, and surprise, surprise, when most of them are challenged from the outside, it does not result in them reflecting on it and changing their opinion. It just results in them saying, no, that's not the way it is, I fail you. That's, and by the way, an over-exaggeration, just so we got that out there. He also did not expect what a proliferation of master degrees and PhDs would do. One of the things it did was make fields of study so big that people can't keep up. There are people who are 30 years into their professorate and that are hopelessly behind on the literature on their field. There are entire schools of thought in their fields that they're not aware of existing. Another thing is it diluted the perceived value of having a master's, both economically, as in the job you can get with it, but also because there are now so many that has them, because universities, in my opinion, today is basically they're basically factories producing skilled, incredibly high-skilled workers. They're not places of higher learning where, because they had to adopt the function of spitting out a higher and higher number of highly educated people for the workforce. So you get a lot of people who has a master's degree, but who has no humility, like we talked about. They have no introspection, reflection. They have no curiosity. They do not go out and seek out more knowledge. They simply take what they've been taught at university at verbatim and deposit it in their brain as fact, and then they just espouse those facts again and again and again. As a thing that was very important for Humboldt was that the student found his own way, because then the student would find his way to passion and to do what he loved, to do what he was passionate about. But the rugged individualism and monetary success ideal primarily spread through American culture, I'm sad to say, but definitely picked up in Europe and further spread, has made many people, out of necessity sometimes, but also out of, I want a big car and big house and all of these things, they choose what they study and their career based on money, not what they truly like, not what they really want to be doing.
Yeah, there's a great comment from a BS opinion again about how professors are experts in their field and they very rarely have any pedagogy experience. So like they're very learned on their topic, but they very often don't have any experience about how to impart knowledge onto other people, like that aren't their peers, as in other people, experts of the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a major failing, I think, of university education. And one of the other things I wanted to mention was that as far as how else can we make this happen, one thing, and people talked about how with free tuition that they're worried that it's going to restrict the courses that people are able to get access to. And one of the things that I find is that as colleges have gone online, or more online courses have been available for more, even some of the prestigious colleges, Stanford and Duke, I think both have some online courses and stuff, that we don't need to have the same educational model as far as attending a university class with 300 people in it and all listening to a lecture and then taking a test in order to determine, or writing a paper, or we can do things differently. And one of the things that we can do differently is digital lectures. So allow people to observe things, absorb information digitally. And what we can do is like how Khan Academy and other experimental things and these things have started doing it. We can note what people are paying attention to, what people are learning, have them demonstrate the comprehension, and we can do these types of things. And maybe in order to avoid, corruption or whatever, at some point they have to be at a live setting and actually take a live test in order to get some sort of accreditation. But otherwise, they could always point and say that, well, I haven't taken the test for accreditation, but I have this many hours watching on this field and experiment, and I've done these papers and I've done these things that people could engage in ways that wouldn't be expensive to the system, because it only costs anything when people want to be reviewed, and a lot of that can be done peer to peer. And then also that was really what I want to talk about, is that we can totally fundamentally change the paradigm of education in the way that we do it, in that we see that people that don't have big buildings and fancy labs and all those types of things are able to achieve and accomplish great educational feats because of how they release their students to be able to inform and educate themselves on the things that are valued in that particular segment of society, I think.
I think that we have to be careful about framing it in cuts. Fearing the free public college would result in tightening of scheduled courses. Well, what has happened so far is that you used to have great public colleges that were all free, and then they were told to save money, so they increased the class size. Then were told to save even more money, and they increased the class size. And then they were told, okay, now we're cutting your funding, and now we're cutting your funding again and again and again. So not only did the budgets of the universities not keep up with inflation and not keep up with the cost of living of those people living there, it actively went the other way, while the budget for the army kept increasing. So and the budget for tax cuts for very large corporations posting record profits also increased. So
your point is taken on the framing, in that it is a concession by accepting the framing that that by making it free we would necessarily need to cut it, and that it would need to come out of the things that it's for, like educating people, rather than swimming pools or some of the extracurricular things that private businesses might, if they could put a Coke banner above the pool, then maybe you don't need to fund that through tuition, kind of thing. And there's certain things that are reasonable.
maybe you hire 5 less VPs that has to make $150,000 a year. Maybe that's one of the things that you do. I mean,
Yeah.
there are many ways of doing this.
Yeah, there's a lot of options for sure.
But it's like in one of my previous shows, I talked about the education model like we have discovered that educating people by giving them grades actually worsens results in comparison to giving people feedback. So if you give people feedback, you get much better results. Getting much better results and teaching people thinking and analysis is much easier and less time consuming, so you could make the argument that you would have smaller classrooms and there would be fewer classes. And that in between these classes you could have music workshops and stuff like that where you are interacting with peers about your own age and stuff like that. So there are many ways of setting it up. You have to shake free of the thinking that it has to be a variation of what we already know.
Yeah, and one thing that Bernie talks about, I know we're running short on time, is that it needs to start early. Like some of the most formative educational years, the ones that help you be able to make those critical thinking decisions, are happening when you're very young, 2, 3, 4 years old. And the more damage that we're doing to these kids by stressing their parents out, making them work 2 jobs, 40, 60 hours a week, and giving them all sorts of financial things to argue about, and all those stressors that we're putting on children at the youngest age when their brains are just developing, and even in the like at the youngest ages, it's super important that we not punish children for having parents who are either unwilling or unable to provide them the things that they need to get past those early years and be able to have a shot at being able to develop the skills that they're going to need to succeed in the future. It's critically important that we don't let that pass us by, I think.
Mm.